Hey everybody, welcome back to History Student Reacts. Today I will be reacting to What Medieval Junk Food Was Like by Weird History. I've seen some of their videos before and I always enjoy them, find them very entertaining. This video just popped up into my recommended, and of course the title is very eye-catching, so I thought, well, let's react to this one. So yeah, I'm excited to get into it, so let's just jump right in.
Stocking up on chips and Twinkies and hitting the drive-thru for a greasy cheeseburger seem like modern institutions.
Right.
But the world's love affair with junk food is a tale as old as time. A lot of what would become the fast food industry began in medieval Europe, where
Really?
people satisfied their junk food cravings with some interesting cuisine. But knights weren't exactly galloping their horses through the drive-thru or grabbing candy bars on their way to the castle. Instead, medieval fast food catered to travelers and the poor, and it wasn't always tasty. Today,
Interesting. I mean, one important thing to note is that, sugar production, really kicks off, I think, in like the 1700s with sugar production in the Caribbean. Places like, Saint Domingue, Cuba, etc., etc. All of the, Barbados, whatever, all these islands in the Caribbean became massive producers of sugar. And all that sugar gets sent back to Europe, and we start getting a lot of modern treats. But not at this point, because we're in medieval Europe.
Today in Weird History, we're taking a look at what junk food was like in the Middle Ages. But before we get started, be sure to subscribe to the Weird History channel. And while you're there, leave a comment and let us know what other historical food topics you would like to hear about next. Okay, time to get medieval on those Cool Ranch Doritos. London is a city known for its major landmarks and for being a hub of British culture, as well as being the place where Harry Potter was hatched in Big Ben by owls. During the Middle Ages, London was a center of trade and commerce, but poverty throughout Europe was high. So for many Londoners, it wasn't easy, convenient, or even possible to cook at home. Cooking equipment and fuel weren't exactly cheap. On top of that, the poor were packed into tenement housing that often didn't have any furnishings, let alone a hearth. Without a hearth, cooking was essentially an unscalable mountain, unless you wanted to fill your home with smoke and risk burning your already meager dwellings to the ground.
Right.
So people visited cook shops instead, the old-timey equivalent of picking up some takeout. Cook shops sprouted up around the Thames to serve the community's fast food needs.
It's interesting because obviously this is an urban phenomenon. And of course, during the medieval ages in Europe, society had become overwhelmingly rural. Now, I mean, it was always overwhelmingly rural, but, you go back to the old Roman era, the cities were bustling and big. And then when we collapse into the Dark Ages, and, medieval times, there's basically flight from the cities and society becomes way more rural. We see the emergence of, European feudalism. So when you think of poor people, you're often just thinking of like peasants and serfs. But of course, there was a population in the cities to a certain extent, and in this video, we're kind of getting a look into that lifestyle, which is interesting because it's not often what I think of when I think of medieval feudal Europe.
These 24-hour cook shops supplied hot food to tourists and residents alike. They were open every day, with menus that changed depending on the season. But instead of driving through on a chariot or horse, the cook shops offered more of a stroll-through experience. Customers would walk up to the shops to purchase their favorite hot meal. Others would buy what they wanted, then take it home to eat later, because scarfing down a plate of takeout is not always what you want to do in public. Cook shops weren't limited to London. One city street in Bristol became known as Cook's Row. Bristol's cook shops offered more variety, including poultry and fish.
Wow.
They may have been among the first to subscribe to the adage, "It's the smell that sells." They'd have their hearths outside the shop and would strategically throw food on to cook so that the smell would entice customers over to grab a quick bite. Some
Smart.
shops served sweets. Others were known for their pancakes and bread. But the most popular might have been the shops that sold meat pies. Those delicious meat-based treats were a popular seller, kind of like a medieval hamburger, but without the fries and Coke. Speaking of burgers, everyone loves a Big Mac. There's just something about clenching most of the basic food groups in your fist and then horking them down like a snake smuggling dinner through airport security. So it makes sense that meat pies, the Dark Age version of a drive-in hamburger, were so popular. These savory little Hot Pockets were filling and portable. The the mark
Yeah.
of a blockbuster.
I mean, hey, meat pies are still pretty big in Britain. And, they're savory, they're filling, there's meat, and they're portable, it's a pretty effective way to eat that kind of food if you need to be, like, walking with it or you need to get it on the go. Your meat is wrapped up in pastry, so it's easy to carry. That's why pastry with meat in it is such a popular treat. And always so good. I mean, meat pies, sausage rolls, empanadas. Good stuff.
Fast food item. But Mrs. Lovett's signature dish had a dark side. Spoiled meat. As it turns out, rancid ingredients could be a real problem in medieval cuisine.
Unsurprising.
According to a 13th century Norwich report, cooks would use diseased pork in their pies and serve them to customers without batting an eye. It wasn't uncommon for shop owners to warm up days-old spoiled pies instead of wasting them. Poverty was extremely desperate, and food safety wasn't exactly on the cooks' minds.
Yeah.
So the decision whether to heap expired food onto the garbage cart or reheat it and sell it to customers was often disturbingly easy. Probably like it is today, if we're being totally honest. When they weren't recycling bad food, shops often undercooked the meat, which earned some cooks a bad reputation. A saying from the time claimed, "God sends the meat, but the devil sends the cooks." The chef manager at Waffle House used to say the same thing. Bread was one of the most common foods during Europe's castle period.
Yep.
But most households didn't have their own grain, so they had to buy it.
I mean, this is why we always talk about, like, bread prices in Europe, when we're talking about, like, peasant revolt, or, even urban revolt, like the French Revolution. We're always talking about the price of bread, because if bread was unaffordable, then people would starve, because bread made up such an important part of the European diet at this time. It was really, it's hard for us to kind of understand how important bread was. A single food commodity that if it's too expensive, your family's probably going to starve. Pretty crazy.
From bakers. And while selling ready-made bread was great, bakers could do much more than that for their customers. For example, if someone brought their own meat to the bakery, they could have the baker wrap it in bread and bake it. The idea caught on, maybe a little too well. London passed a law in 1350 preventing bakers from charging more than a penny if customers brought their own meat from home. Meanwhile, you bring your own meat to Burger King one time, and they ban you for life. It wasn't like it was a cow. Not sure what the big deal was. Another modern-day fast food item came about around this time, too. The bread bowl. Modern Europeans pioneered the concept by serving soup and stews in a bowl made out of bread, which they called trenchers. The practice helped bulk up a meal, and was probably cheaper as it cut down on the need for dishes. But bread bowls weren't the only carb-loading option of the Middle Ages. In addition to being a staple of state fairs and aimless mall wandering, soft pretzels were also incredibly popular in medieval Europe.
Wow.
3 simple ingredients combined to create the twisted treat. Just mix a little bit of water, some flour, and some salt. You've got yourself a filling snack officially approved by the Catholic Church. That's right. During fasting periods like Lent, when Catholics avoided eating certain animal products, pretzels often took their place as a substitute. Monks would hand them out to kids reciting their prayers, while others would distribute them to the poor.
Never would have
Outside of the
guessed
church,
it.
Pretzels became a symbol of luck and prosperity. And what's not to feel lucky about when you're chowing down on a handmade pretzel? Nothing
True.
completes a fast food run like a 6-pack of booze, because if you're treating yourself, you might as well go all the way. And while drinking alcohol has been a popular activity, medieval Europeans really liked to drink, possibly because they were living in medieval Europe.
Yeah.
Not even Lent had any effect on the common folks' thirst for memory-erasing refreshment. Part of observing Lent meant not eating meat. So,
Also, if you think about the drink selection in medieval Europe, obviously later on, stuff like coffee and tea would become big in Europe. But at this point, you can drink disgusting, dirty water, which will give you diseases. Of course, they didn't necessarily know that. We would find out later that water would disease us. Or you can have alcohol. If those are your options, I'm sure there were some other kinds of drinks, but mainly you were pretty constrained in what sort of drinks you had access to. So alcohol was basically your best option.
So folks would fill that gap in their regular diets with other things. Fish became the alternative choice for some, others turned to booze. While it provided temporary solace from abstaining, the practice of staying thoroughly soaked through Lent didn't sit well with some prominent religious figures. In 1400, the Benedictine monk Robert Ripon had strong words for anyone drowning their sorrows. He scolded excessive drinking as flying in the face of the abstinence that Lent was meant to symbolize,
Wow.
and opined that people got more drunk during Lent than they did during the entire rest of the year. Of course, he probably didn't have to eat some of the meat substitutes that commoners were forced to turn to, like the mock egg, a dish that was invented as a meat replacement during Lent. If he had, he might have been pounding brews in the tavern right beside them. Making a mock egg is easy even today. Just take a few empty eggshells, fill them with a mixture of almond milk jelly and crunchy almonds. Then dye it yellow and choke it down with a mug of ale. Tasty? Now pass the beer, please.
I mean, it sounds okay. It's just like almonds, basically.
Sugar is one of those things we take for granted today. But during the medieval period, sugar was pretty hard to come by and was usually out of reach of the masses. Only those who could afford the expensive sweet stuff regularly consumed it. So rather than sugar-filled candy bars, people would flock to the cook shops for treats sweetened with honey. A fritter recipe from the 14th century cookbook Anonimo Veneziano calls for apples, saffron, flour, and honey. An earlier, more frugal fritter recipe was just fried dough, stuffed with gingered almonds and topped with a delicious bee juice. Gingerbread, another popular item for satisfying the peasantry's sweet tooth, also used honey, incorporating ginger, cloves, and pepper, giving it an inimitable sweet and spicy flavor. But when you're in the mood to throw money at a cholesterol spike, there's nothing quite like...
Yeah, I'm pretty sure a lot of these treats would not taste that much like treats to us, because of how absolutely used to sugar we've become in the past, like, I don't know, 200 and something years. Now we just have, particularly in America, we have sugar in freaking everything, and sweet stuff is really, really sweet. I think if you gave some of our, like, candies or treats to a medieval European peasant, they would, perhaps be amazed by the level of sweetness you can fit into one item. But of course, like I mentioned earlier, and Weird History just mentioned, there was very little access to sugar at this time, so they're relying on stuff like honey to sweeten their sweet treats.
The funnel cake, a delicious combo of fried dough and powdered sugar, the mother of all carnival foods, got its start in medieval times. Funnel cakes began as fried cakes called crisps. Because of their sugary topping, the cakes were a rare treat. Since ingredients like sugar was so limited, people would often improvise their own recipes, which is how we got dishes like fritter of milk, which is just fried, sweetened cottage cheese, otherwise known as a dessert you give your kids when you want to punish them. Waffles, as we know them, also came about during this time. The original waffles date back to ancient Greece. Known as ovelios, they were flat cakes cooked between two plates, and they weren't sweet, which is a huge oversight that arguably contributed to Greece's downfall. Later, the Catholic Church began making flour waffle wafers, which typically depicted biblical scenes. But it wasn't until the Crusades when a more recognizable version of waffle batter, combining cinnamon, honey, and cream, really took off in Europe.
Look
And
like
in the
pancakes.
15th century, the Dutch invented the famous grid patterns that transformed waffles into the optimal syrup and whipped cream delivery.
I think pancakes and waffles are just the same thing, except waffles are square-shaped. So, same difference.
Systems celebrated by junk food connoisseurs centuries later. Initially, waffles were a common street food, but would eventually become the breakfast and dessert staple we fling into toasters to this day. Thanks to the discovery of the New World, sugar became affordable and accessible to everyone by the 16th century.
Oh, okay.
London even opened a sugar refinery.
Earlier than I
prompting a
thought.
trend that continues in modern food processing today, adding sugar to almost everything. Sugar quickly replaced honey in most desserts. People began crystallizing their fruit in syrups, and even started using sugar to season their meats. If you cover a plate of fish and vegetables with enough sugar, eventually it tastes just like sugar, which was a welcome respite for poverty-stricken families accustomed to eating rotten meat.
You do you, I guess.
Sugary concoctions became popular junk foods during the period, including crispy crusts topped with berries, fruit, or ginger, and a sweet, fruit-filled ravioli called cuscanoles. Cuscanoles is just a good name. You can picture that on a Hostess wrapper next to a mascot, like the Cuscanoles Kid. This love of sweetness transformed the European diet to such a degree that the word dessert can even be traced back to this time. Derived from the French word desservir, meaning to clear the table, the French were using it to mean last course by the mid-16th century. The English later adapted dessert to refer to the final course of fruits and sweets that people ate after their meal. The Cuscanol's kid would be proud. So what do you think? Would you be willing to try some junk food from the Dark Ages?
I'd be willing to try it, but I have to say, I am glad that I live right now. I mean, for many reasons, for many different reasons, I'm glad I live right now, but also for the food. You know, some of the things shown in the video didn't look that bad, but definitely an odd selection, which is not surprising given the scarcity of the time. I'm glad we live now where we have an abundance of everything unhealthy. I mean, it's not really good for us, as shown by our obesity rates around the world, but, you know, it's pretty tasty. Alright, that was an interesting and entertaining video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I had a good time with it. If you did enjoy it, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and check out the Patreon. I hope you guys are having a good day today, and I will see you guys again next time. Goodbye.